3 days. That's all it took. 3 days to kill a $3.7 billion deal that was supposed to change North America forever. Not years of negotiations, not a court battle, not a diplomatic crisis. 3 days. And when you find out why it died that fast, and more importantly, who actually wanted it dead, you're going to look at every Chinese infrastructure project in the Western Hemisphere completely differently. Because this isn't a story about a canceled train. This is a story about an invisible line that China didn't know existed until it crossed it. Before we get into the mechanics of how this all collapsed, I need to tell you something that should genuinely disturb you. When this contract was announced, China wasn't just selling Mexico a train. China was planting a flag. This would have been the first Chinese high-speed rail project anywhere in the Americas. Not in Africa, not in Southeast Asia, in America's backyard, in a country that ships 80% of its exports to the United States, whose factories are physically stitched into the American manufacturing system. If this had worked, it would have proven something the United States absolutely did not want proven: that Beijing could build, finance, and operate strategic infrastructure inside North America's economic core. That is the story. Everything else, the scandal, the corruption, the canceled bids, that's just the wrapping paper. Stick with me, because this goes deeper than any headline covered at the time. And if you're new here, subscribe, because this channel is the only place where you're going to get the geopolitics and the engineering in the same sentence, every single time. So let's start with the thing itself, because it was genuinely impressive before it was dead. Mexico City and Queretaro sit 210 kilometers apart. That's roughly the distance from London to Birmingham and back. On paper, it looks like nothing. In practice, that corridor is one of the most economically congested stretches in all of Latin America. Freight trucks, private cars, a rail network that hasn't been seriously upgraded in decades. The result is a journey that routinely takes 2 to 3 hours each way. For workers, for freight, for factories, for every business moving goods and people between Mexico's capital and one of its fastest growing industrial hubs, that bottleneck costs money. Every single day. The proposed fix was a 300 kilometers per hour high-speed rail line, the kind of train that turns a 2-hour grind into a 50-minute commute. Think about what that does to a regional economy. Suddenly, a factory worker in Queretaro has realistic access to Mexico City's labor market. A logistics operation in the capital has same-day reach into a city full of universities, manufacturing plants, and export corridors. 27,000 passengers per day would move through this system. That's not a train, that's an artery. The price tag was 50.8 billion pesos, roughly $3.7 billion, and that figure covered construction, rolling stock, maintenance, and 5 full years of operations. For a high-speed rail project, that is lean. European and Japanese high-speed corridors of comparable distance routinely run 40 to 60% higher per kilometer. And here's the part that sealed it. China wasn't just selling the infrastructure, China was financing it. A long-term loan from the Export-Import Bank of China at rates Mexico simply could not find anywhere else. No draining the national budget, no painful bond issuance, just build now, pay later, and get a world-class rail system in return. For Mexico, it looked like the deal of the century. So how did it die in 72 hours? Here's where it gets insane. To understand the death of this deal, you have to understand how it was born, because the birth was already suspicious. When Mexico opened bidding in mid-2014, the international rail industry showed up. Alstom from France, Siemens from Germany, Bombardier from Canada, multiple Japanese consortiums. These are the companies that have built every major high-speed rail corridor on Earth. They all came, they all looked, and then, one by one, they all left. Why? Because the bidding window was absurdly short for a project of this scale and complexity. Competitors formally asked the Mexican government for more time. The government said no. So the Europeans left, the Japanese left, the Canadians left. And when the deadline arrived, exactly one bid sat on the table, from a consortium led by China Railway Construction Corporation, paired with Chinese rolling stock manufacturer CSR and a group of Mexican firms, most notably Grupo Higa. Sit with that for a moment. a $3.7 billion first-of-its-kind flagship infrastructure project, and only one company bothered to bid. That's not normal. That's not even close to normal. And the Mexican government's answer was, fine, contract awarded November 3, 2014. Done. Now here's the kicker. Within days, not weeks, not months, days, investigative journalists published a story that lit the entire thing on fire. Mexico's First Lady, Angelica Rivera, owned a luxury mansion worth roughly $7 million. The property had become known as La Casa Blanca, the White House. Under normal circumstances, a politician's spouse owning expensive real estate is uncomfortable, but not immediately explosive. What made this a nuclear event was one specific detail. The company behind the mansion was directly linked to Grupo Higa, the same Grupo Higa that was sitting inside the Chinese-led rail consortium that had just won a $3.7 billion government contract. The same consortium, the same company, 3 days after the award. The connection was right there in public documents. And once journalists drew the line from the mansion to the rail contract, there was no undrawing it. The government tried everything. Officials insisted the bidding had followed legal standards. They argued the mansion purchase had nothing to do with the rail award, and maybe they were technically right. But perception doesn't care about technicalities, and in a country already furious about corruption and impunity, the optics were catastrophic. Opposition parties had the story they needed. Media coverage was relentless. President Peña Nieto's administration was already under enormous pressure. This was the same period when the government was absorbing the aftermath of the Ayotzinapa student disappearances, a scandal that had already shattered public trust. Adding a $3.7 billion corruption allegation on top of that was not survivable. So on November 6, 2014, 3 days after the award, Mexico's transport ministry canceled the contract. Not suspended, not reviewed, canceled, void, gone. And that's the part nobody's talking about. Because here's the question that the domestic corruption story never fully answers. Why was the cancellation that fast? Large infrastructure contracts do not die in 72 hours. Even when corruption is real and documented, governments typically launch audits. They commission reviews. They delay. They manage the optics over weeks or months. Mexico went from award to total cancellation faster than most government agencies can schedule a meeting. The corruption scandal was the trigger, yes, but something else had already been pointing the gun. Let's zoom out, because this is where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable. Mexico is not just any country. It is economically fused to the United States in a way that almost no other nation on Earth is. 80% of Mexico's exports go north. The auto plants in Queretaro, the electronics factories in Monterrey, the agricultural supply chains that feed American supermarkets, all of it runs through American trade relationships, American financial systems, American security guarantees. Mexico doesn't have the luxury of strategic ambiguity the way Brazil or Argentina does. When Washington notices something, Mexico feels it, and Washington was absolutely noticing this. By 2014, the United States was already watching China's expanding infrastructure footprint across Latin America with deep unease. Chinese banks were financing ports in Chile, hydroelectric dams in Ecuador, highways in Bolivia, railways across the continent. Trade between China and Latin America had grown more than 20 times since the year 2000. 20 times. But all of that, from Washington's perspective, was happening at a comfortable distance. Mexico was different. Mexico is not Latin America in the geopolitical sense. Mexico is inside the North American economic architecture. A Chinese-built, Chinese-financed, Chinese-operated infrastructure corridor in Mexico would not threaten a single American soldier, but it would establish something Washington considers far more dangerous than military presence: dependency. Once infrastructure is built, the relationship doesn't end when construction stops. Maintenance contracts, technology upgrades, replacement parts, operational data, these are long-term threads that tie a country to its builder for decades. Washington understood exactly what a successful Chinese rail project in Mexico would mean as a precedent. And Mexican decision-makers understood what Washington understood. No phone call needed, no public warning, no press conference. That's not how this kind of pressure works. It works structurally. Through the quiet calculus of trade relationships and China was blindsided. Executives from China Railway Construction Corporation said they learned about the cancellation through the media. No prior notification, no negotiation, no warning. Chinese state media described the decision as abrupt and unfair. Voices online accused Mexico of political cowardice and pointed fingers directly at Washington. It didn't matter. The project was gone. Here's the second layer. Because Mexico is not alone. This exact pattern has played out across the Western Hemisphere. In Panama, a country that controls one of the most strategically critical waterways in human history, Chinese firms began expanding port operations and logistics infrastructure starting around 2017. As Chinese presence near the Panama Canal grew, American concern intensified publicly and explicitly. By 2024, Panama was stepping back from cooperation agreements with Beijing. By 2025, it declined to renew its Belt and Road commitments entirely. Panama never said Washington forced its hand. It didn't need to. When your economy runs through a canal that American strategic doctrine treats as a vital national interest, the calculus is obvious. Further south in Nicaragua, a Chinese-backed consortium announced a plan to build a $50 billion interoceanic canal, a rival to Panama, cutting directly through Central America. Think about what that would have meant: a Chinese-controlled maritime corridor connecting the Atlantic and Pacific, sitting between the United States and South America. The project never broke ground. Financing problems, environmental opposition, political instability, all real obstacles, all documented. But the strategic reality shadowed every delay. That canal would have placed Beijing in direct operational control of a global shipping choke point, right inside the US near abroad. It was formally canceled in the early 2020s. In Argentina, Chinese-funded hydroelectric dams were paused when a new government took office. Officials questioned contract terms and transparency. Construction eventually resumed, but only after renegotiation, delays, and a conspicuous round of political signaling toward Western partners. The pattern is consistent. Projects advance when US attention is elsewhere or when they sit far enough from strategic infrastructure. Projects slow, stall, or die when they get too close to something Washington considers vital. I want to be straight with you about something because intellectual honesty matters here. The corruption story in Mexico was not invented. Grupo Higa's connection to the First Lady's mansion was real, documented, and politically devastating. The bidding process for this contract was genuinely problematic. A compressed timeline that effectively locked out international competitors, a single remaining bid, and a contract awarded to a consortium with direct ties to the president's family. A serious anti-corruption case existed entirely independently of any geopolitical framing. It is also true that China Railway Construction Corporation was a legitimate builder. CRRC, the successor to CSR, has completed hundreds of rail projects across Asia, Africa, and Europe. The technical proposal was real. The financing was real. The engineering capacity was real. Mexico had domestic reasons to cancel this contract that had nothing to do with Washington. And China's expanding infrastructure role in Latin America has brought genuine benefits to many countries: roads, ports, and power plants that those governments genuinely needed and could not finance otherwise. The geopolitics didn't invent the scandal. They just made sure it didn't survive it. Here's where it lands. More than 10 years after that 72-hour collapse, Mexico in 2025 announced a new plan for the exact same corridor, a passenger rail line connecting Mexico City and Queretaro. The same route, the same logic, the same economic need. But everything else is different now. It will be led by the Mexican state. It will be built by domestic engineering entities. It will not be a bullet train. Conventional speeds, phased construction, a longer timeline. The corridor is back. The ambition is smaller, the geopolitical weight is gone. Think about that for a second. The need for this rail line was real in 2014, and it is still real in 2025. 11 years later, Mexico is starting over, with less speed, less scale, and presumably more political safety. And the workers commuting between these two cities are still sitting in the same traffic they were sitting in a decade ago. There is a version of 2014 where this contract proceeds, where China builds its first American high-speed rail project, proves the technology works in the Western Hemisphere, and uses Mexico as a launchpad for a dozen more proposals across the continent. There is a version where Queretaro becomes what cities along China's 40,000-kilometer rail network became: connected, accelerated, economically transformed. That version didn't happen. It died in 3 days. And whether you think that's a tragedy, a necessary correction, or simply how great power competition works, understand what it actually means. In the contest between U.S. strategic influence and Chinese infrastructure ambition, the United States didn't have to fire a single shot. It just had to be present. The train never ran, the tracks were never laid, but the message was received. So here's what I want you to think about. In 2025, as the same corridor gets rebuilt under domestic control at lower speed and lower ambition, was this actually a win for Mexico, or did the country lose 11 years of economic development to protect a strategic relationship that was never really negotiable in the first place? Leave your answer in the comments below. I read everyone. And if this kind of story, where infrastructure, money, and power intersect in ways the mainstream never covers, is what you're here for, then subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from.